Rumpole and the Younger Generation. I, Horace Rumpole, barrister at law, 68, next birthday, Old Bailey hack, husband to Mrs. Hilda Rumpole, known to me as she who must be obeyed, and father to Nicholas, lecturer in social studies at the University of Baltimore, take up my pen at this advanced age during a lull in business, in order to write my reconstruction of some of my recent triumphs, and perhaps give some entertainment to those who, like myself, have found in British justice a lifelong subject of harmless fun. When I first considered putting pen to paper in this matter of my life, I thought I must begin with the great cases of my comparative youth. The Penge Bungalow murder, where I gained an acquittal alone and without a leader, or the Great Brighton Benefit Club forgery, which I contrived to win by reason of my exhaustive study of typewriters. At that time my name seemed almost a permanent feature of the news of the world, but when I come to look back on that period of my life at the bar, it all seems to have happened to another Rumpole, an eager young barrister, whom I can scarcely recognize, and whom I am not at all sure I would like. I am not a public figure now, but I suppose I must have become pretty well known, if not something of a legend, around the Old Bailey and Pomeroy's wine bar in Fleet Street, in the roaming room at London Sessions, and in the cells at Brixton Prison. They know me there for never pleading guilty, for chain-smoking small cigars, and for quoting Wordsworth when they least expected. To understand the full effect on my family life of that case which I have called Rumpole and the Younger Generation, it is necessary to know a little of my past. My father, the Reverend Wilfred Rumpole, was a Church of England clergyman who, in early middle age, came reluctantly to the conclusion that he no longer believed in any one of the 39 Articles. As he was not fitted by character or training for any other profession, he had to soldier on in his living in Croydon, and by a good deal of scraping and saving, he was able to send me as a boarder to a minor public school on the Norfolk coast. I later went to Keble College, Oxford, where I achieved a dubious third in law. My father's example and the number of theological students I met at Keble gave me an early mistrust of clergymen, whom I have always found to be most unsatisfactory witnesses. If you call a clergyman in mitigation, the old darling can be guaranteed to add at least a year to the sentence. When I first went to the bar, I entered the chambers of C.H. Whiston. Whiston had a moderate practice, acquired rather by industry than talent, and a strong disinclination to look at the photographs in murder cases, being particularly squeamish on the fascinating subject of blood. He also had a daughter, Hilda Whiston, as was now Mrs. Hilda Rumpole. I was ambitious in those days. I did my best to cultivate Whiston's clerk, Albert, and I started to get a good deal of criminal work. I did what was expected of me, and spent happy hours round the Bailey and Sessions, and my fame grew in criminal circles. At the end of the day, I would take Albert for a drink in Pomeroy's wine bar. We got on extremely well, and he would always recommend his Mr. Rumpole if a solicitor rang up with a particularly tricky indecent assault or a nasty case of receiving stolen property. There is no point in writing your memoirs unless you are prepared to be completely candid, and I must confess that in the course of a long life I have been in love on several occasions. I am sure that I loved Miss Porter, the shy and nervous but at times liberated daughter of Septimus Porter, my Oxford tutor in Roman law. And during my service with the ground staff of the RAF, I became helplessly smitten with the charms of an extremely warm-hearted and gallant officer of the WAFs, by the name of Miss Bobby O'Keefe. But I was no match for the wings of a pilot officer, as appeared on the chest of a certain Sam Three Fingers Doherty. But my relationship with Hilda Whiston was rather different. To begin with, she seemed part of life in Chambers. She was always interested in the law and ambitious, first for her widowed father, and then, when he proved himself unlikely Lord Chancellor material, for me. She often dropped in for tea on her way home from shopping, and Whiston used to invite me in for a cup. One year I was detailed off to be her partner at the Inns of Court ball. There it became clear to me that I was expected to marry Hilda. It seemed a step in my career, like getting a brief in the Court of Appeal or doing a murder. When she proposed to me, as she did over a glass of claret cup after an energetic waltz, Hilda made it clear that when old Whiston finally retired, she expected to see me head of chambers. I, who have never felt at a loss for a word in court, found absolutely nothing to say. In that silence, the matter was concluded. So now you must picture Hilda and me 25 years later, with a son at the same East Coast public school which I just managed to afford from the fruits of crime, in our matrimonial home at 25B Froxbury Court, Gloucester Road. We were having breakfast, and between bites of toast, I was reading my brief for that day, an Old Bailey trial of the 16-year-old Jim Timpson, charged with robbery with violence, he having allegedly taken part in a wage snatch on a couple of elderly butchers, an escapade planned in the playground of the local comprehensive. As so often happens, the poet Wordsworth, that old sheep of the Lake District, sprang immediately to mind, and I gave tongue to his lines, well knowing that they must only serve to irritate she who must be obeyed. Trailing clouds of glory do we come from God who is our home. Heaven lies about us in our infancy. I looked at Hilda. She was impassively demolishing a boiled egg. I also noticed she was wearing a hat, as if prepared to set out upon some expedition. I decided to give her a little more Wordsworth, prompted by my reading the story of the boy Timpson. Shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy. Hilda spoke at last. Rumpole, you're not talking about your son, I hope. Shades of the prison house begin to close, not round our son, of course. No, not round Nick. Shades of the public school have grown round him, the £1,000 a year remand home. Hilda always thought it indelicate to refer to the subject of school fees. She became increasingly businesslike. He's breaking up this morning. Shades of the prison house began to open up for holidays. Nick has to be met at 11:15 at Liverpool Street and given lunch. When he went back to school, you promised him a show. You haven't forgotten. Hilda was clearing away the plates rapidly. To tell the truth, I had forgotten the date of Nick's holidays, but I let her assume I had a long-planned treat laid on for him. Of course I haven't forgotten. The only show I can offer him is a robbery with violence in No. 2 Court at the Old Bailey. I wish I could lay on a murder. Nick's always so enjoyed my murders. Well, I must fly, Hilda said. Daddy gets so crotchety if anyone's late, and he does love his visits. Our father, which art in Horsham, give my respects to the old sweetheart. It had also slipped my mind that old C.H. Whiston was laid up with a dicky ticker in Horsham General Hospital. The hat was, no doubt, a clue I should have followed. Hilda usually goes shopping in a headscarf. By now she was at the door and looking disapproving. Old sweetheart is hardly how you used to talk of the head of your chambers. And somehow I can never remember to call the head of my chambers Daddy. The door was open. Hilda was making a slow and effective exit. Tell Nick I'll be back in good time to get his supper. Your wish is my command, I muttered. And try not to leave the kitchen looking as though it's been hit by a bomb. I hear, O master of the blue horizons, I said, and added, for good measure, she who must be obeyed. Soon after I finished my breakfast with Hilda and made plans to meet my son at the start of his holidays from school, Fred Timpson, star of a dozen court appearances, was seeing his son in the cells under the Old Bailey as the result of a specially arranged visit. I imagine he told him that they had the best brief in the business to defend him, Mr. Rumpole having always done wonders for the Timpson family. The robbery with which Jim Timpson was charged was an exceedingly simple one. At about 7 p.m. one Friday evening, the date being the 16th of September, the two elderly Brixton butchers, Mr. Cadwallader and Mr. Lewis Stein, closed their shop in Bombay Road and walked with the week's takings round the corner to a narrow alleyway known as Green's Passage, where their grey Austin van was parked. When they got to the van, they found that the front tyres had been deflated. They stooped to inspect the wheels, and as they did so, they were attacked by a number of boys, some armed with knives and one flourishing a cricket stump. Luckily, neither of the butchers was hurt, but the attaché case containing their money was snatched. Chief Inspector Percival White, the old darling in whose territory this outrage had been committed, arrested Jim Timpson. All the other boys got clean away, but no doubt because he came from a family well known, indeed almost embarrassingly familiar, to the Chief Inspector, and because of certain rumours in the school playground, he was charged and put on an identity parade. The butchers failed totally to identify him. But when he was in the remand centre, young Jim, according to the evidence, had boasted to another boy of having done the butchers. In the clerk's room in Chambers, Albert was handing out the work for the day. I looked around the familiar faces. My friend George Frobisher, who is an old sweetheart but an absolutely hopeless advocate, he can't ask for costs without writing down what he's going to say, was being fobbed off with a nuisance at Kingston County Court. Young Erskine Brown, who wears striped shirts and what I believe are known as Chelsea boots, was turning up his well-bred nose at an indecent assault at Lambeth, and saying he would prefer a little civil work, adding that he was sick to death of crime. "You're dangerous and careless. That Clerkenwell is on the mantelpiece, Mr. Hoskins," Albert said. Hoskins is a gloomy fellow with 4 daughters. He's always lurking about our clerk's room looking for checks. As I've not told him often enough, crime doesn't pay, or at any rate not for a very long time. Our oldest member, Uncle Tom, very few of us remember that his name is T.C. Rowley, also asked Albert if there were any briefs for him, not in the least expecting to find one. To my certain knowledge, Uncle Tom hasn't appeared in court for 15 years, when he managed to lose an undefended divorce case. He spends most of his time in Chambers and looks remarkably well for 78. Albert told me that my robbery was not before 11:30, before Mr. Justice Everglade in No. 1 Court. He also told me who was prosecuting, none other than the tall, elegant figure with a silk handkerchief and gold wristwatch leaning against the mantelpiece and negligently reading a large cheque from the Director of Public Prosecutions, Guthrie Featherstone, MP. He removed the silk handkerchief, dabbed at the ends of his nose and his small moustache, and said, "Agin me, Rumpole, are you agin me?" He covered a slight yawn with the handkerchief before returning it to his breast pocket. "Just come from an all-night sitting down at the house. I don't suppose your robbery will be much of a worry." "Only possibly to young Jim Timpson," I told him, and then gave Albert his orders for the day. "Mrs. Rumpole's gone down to see her father in Horsham." "Oh, how is Whiston? No better, is he?" Uncle Tom sounded as gently pleased as all old men do when they hear news of illness in others. "Oh, much the same, Uncle Tom, thank you. And young Nick, my son." "Oh, Master Nick?" Albert had always been fond of Nick, and looked forward to putting him through his paces when the time came for him to join our stable in Chambers. "Yes, he's breaking up today, so he'll need meeting at Liverpool Street. Then he can watch a bit of the robbery." "Oh, we're going to have your son in the audience. I'd better be brilliant." Guthrie Featherstone now moved from the fireplace. "Oh, you needn't bother, old darling. It's his dad he's come to see." "Oh, touché, Rumpole, distinctement touché." Yeah, Featherstone talks like that. Then he invited me to walk down to the Bailey with him. Apparently he was still capable of movement and didn't need a stretcher, even after a sleepless night with a gas mains enabling bill, or whatever it was. As we walked down Fleet Street, Featherstone said, "You've been this game a long while, Rumpole." I didn't disagree with him, and then he went on, "You never thought of taking silk?" Rumpole Q.C. I almost burst out laughing. Not on your Nelly, Rumpole Queer Customer, that's what they'd be bound to call me. I'm sure you could with your seniority. I had no idea then of exactly what Featherstone was after. I gave him my view of QCs in general. Or perhaps if I played golf with the right judges or put up for Parliament, they might make me an artificial silk or at any rate a nylon. It was at that point I realized I had put up a bit of a black. Oh, sorry, I forgot. You did put up for Parliament. Yes, you never thought of Rumpole QC? Featherstone had apparently taken no offence. Never, I told him. I have the honour to be an Old Bailey hack. That's quite enough for me. At which point we turned up into Newgate Street, and there it was in all its glory. Touched by a hint of early spring sunshine, the Old Bailey, a stately law court decreed by the city fathers, an Edwardian palace with an extensive modern extension to deal with the increase in human fallibility. Why is it I never go in the revolving door without a thrill of pleasure, a slight tremble of excitement? Why does it seem a much jollier place than my flat in Gloucester Road, under the strict rule of she who must be obeyed? At the time when I was waving a cheerful umbrella at Harry, the policeman in the revolving door at the Old Bailey extension, my wife Hilda was at her daddy's bedside at the Horsham General, arranging her dozen early daffs and gently probing, as she told me that evening, on the subject of his future and mine. I'll have to give up, you know. I can't go on forever. Crocked up, I'm afraid, said Whiston. Oh, nonsense, Daddy. You'll go on for years. No, Hilda, no. They'll have to start looking for another head of chambers. This gave Hilda her opportunity. Well, Rumpole's the senior man, apart from Uncle Tom, and he doesn't really practice nowadays. Your husband a senior man? Whiston looked back on a singularly uneventful life. How time flies! I recall when he was the junior man, my pupil. Well, you said he was the best youngster on Bloodstains you'd ever known. Hilda was doing her best for me. Yes, your husband was pretty good on Bloodstains. Shaky, though, on the law of landlord and tenant. What sort of practice has Rumpole now? Well, I believe today it's the Old Bailey. Hilda was plumping pillows, doing her best to sound casual, and her father showed no particular enthusiasm for my place of work. It's always the Old Bailey, isn't it? Most of the time, yes, I suppose so. Sensing that Daddy would have thought better of me if I had been in the Court of Appeal or the Chancery Division, Hilda told me she thought of a masterstroke. Oh, Rumpole only went down to the Bailey because it's a family he knows. It seems they've got a young boy in trouble. And this appealed to Daddy. He gave one of his bleak smiles, which amounted to no more than a brief withdrawal of lips from the dentures. Son gone wrong, he said. Very sad, that. Especially if he comes of a really good family. That really good family, the Timpsons, was out in force and waiting outside No. 1 Court by the time I had got on the fancy dress. Yellowing horsehair wig, gown, become more than a trifle tattered over the years, and bands round the neck that Albert ought to have sent to the laundry after last week's death by dangerous driving. As I looked at the Timpson clan assembled, I thought the best thing about them was the amount of work of a criminal nature they had brought into chambers. They were all dressed for the occasion, the men in dark blazers, suede shoes, and grey flannels, the ladies in tight-fitting suits, high heels, and elaborately piled hairdos. I had never seen so many ex-clients together at one time. Mr. Rumpole. Ah, Bernard, you're instructing me. Mr. Bernard, the solicitor, was a 30-ish, perpetually smiling man in a pinstriped suit. I'm always your instructing solicitor in the Timpson case, Mr. Rumpole. Mr. Bernard beamed, and Fred Timpson, a kindly man and most innocent robber, stepped out of the ranks to do the honours. Nothing but a best for the Timpsons. Best solicitor and best barrister going. You know my wife, Vi? Young Jim's mother seemed full of confidence. As I took her hand, I remembered I had got Vi off on a handling charge after the Croydon bank raid. "Uncle Cyril?" Fred introduced the plumpish uncle with the small moustache, whom I was sure I remembered. What was his last outing exactly? Carrying housebreaking instruments by night? "Uncle Dennis? You remember Den, surely, Mr. Rumpole?" I did. Den's last little matter was an alleged conspiracy to forge logbooks. "And Den's Doris?" Auntie Doris came at me in a blur of hennaed hair and darkish perfume. "And yours truly, Frederick Timpson, the boy's father." A family to breed from, the Timpsons. Must almost keep the Old Bailey going single-handed. "You're going to do your best for our young Jim, I'm sure, Mr. Rumpole." I didn't find the simple faith of the Timpsons that I could secure acquittals in the most unlikely circumstances especially encouraging. But then Jim's mother said something which I was long to remember. "He's a good boy. He was ever so good to me while Dad was away." So that was Jimbo's life. Head of the family at 14, when Dad was off on one of his regular visits to Her Majesty. "It's our young Jim's first appearance, like, at the Old Bailey." Fred couldn't conceal a note of pride. It was Jimbo's bar mitzvah, his first communion. So we chatted a little about how all the other boys got clean away, which I told them was a bit of luck, as none of them would go into the witness box and implicate Jim. And Bernard pointed out that the identification by the butchers was pretty hopeless. Well, what did he expect? Would you have a photographic impression of the young hopeful who struck you a smart blow on the back of the head with a cricket stump? We talked with that curious suppressed excitement there always is before a trial, however disastrous the outcome may be, and I told them the only thing we had to worry about, as if that were not enough, was Jim's confession to the boy in the remand centre, the youth who rejoiced in the name of Peanuts Malloy. "Peanuts Malloy, little grass!" Fred Timpson spoke with a deep contempt. "Old Percival White fitted him up with that one, didn't he?" Uncle Cyril said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world and only to be expected. "Chief Detective Inspector White," Bernard explained. "Oh, why should the Chief Inspector want to fit up your Jimbo?" It was a question to which I should have known what their answer would be. "Because he's a Timpson, that's why," said Fred. "The Chief Inspector put that little grass into Jim's painting class at the remand centre." Fred had no doubt about it. Jim had apparently poured out his soul to Peanuts. The evidence sounded to my old ears completely convincing, and Bernard read us a snatch from his file. "We planned to do the old blokes from the butchers and grab the wages." That, I reminded the assembled company, is what Peanuts will say Jim told him. "You think I'd bring Jim up to talk in the neck like that? The Timpsons ain't stupid." Fred was outraged, and Vi, pursing her lips in a sour gesture of wounded respectability, added, "His dad's always told him, never say a word to anyone you're banged up with, bound to be a grass, and especially not to one of the Malloys, noted grasses. That family always has been. No, Mr. Rumpole, no Timpson would ever speak to a Malloy." "So you're sure Jimbo never said anything to Peanuts?" I was wondering exactly how I could explain the deep but not particularly creditable origins of this family hostility to the jury. "I give you my word, Mr. Rumpole, ain't that enough for you? No Timpson would ever speak to a Malloy, not under any circumstances." When I saw the youngest Timpson before his trial that morning, I couldn't help noticing how much smaller and how much more experienced he looked than my Nick. In his clean sports jacket and carefully knotted tie, he was well dressed for the dock, and he showed all the carefully suppressed excitement of a young lad about to step into the limelight of number one, with an old judge, 12 jurors, and a mixed bag of lawyers waiting to give him their undivided attention. "Me speak to Peanuts? No, Timpson don't ever speak to a Malloy. It's a point of honour, like." Jim added his voice to the family chorus. "So, Jim, what's the defence?" Little Jim knitted his brows and came out with his contribution. "Well, I didn't do it." "Well, that's an interesting defence, somewhat novel so far as the Timpsons are concerned." "I got my alibi, ain't I?" Jim looked at me accusingly. "Oh, yes, your alibi. I'm afraid I didn't sound overwhelmed with enthusiasm." "Well, Dad reckoned it was pretty good." Mr. Bernard had his invaluable file open and was reading from that less-than-inspiring document, our notice of alibi. "Straight from school on that Friday, September the 2nd, I went up to tea at my Auntie Doris's, and arrived there at exactly 5:30. At 6 p.m. my Uncle Den came home from work, accompanied by my Uncle Cyril. At 7 p.m., when this alleged crime was taking place, I was sat round the television with my auntie and two uncles. I well remember we was watching The Newcomers." All very neat and workmanlike. Well, that was it. The family gave young Jim an alibi, clubbed together for it like a new bicycle. However, I had to disappoint Mr. Bernard about the bright, shining alibi, and we went through the swing doors on our way to court. "We can't use that alibi." "We can't?" Mr. Bernard looked wounded, as if I had just insulted his favourite child. "Look, think about it, Bernard. Don't be blinded by the glamour of the criminal classes. Call the uncles and aunties. Let them all be cross-examined about their records. The jury will realise how Jimbo comes from a family of villains who keep a cupboard full of alibis for all occasions." Mr. Bernard was forced to agree, but I went into my old place in court, nearest to the jury, furthest from the witness box, thinking that the devilish thing about that impossible alibi was that it might even be true. So there I was, sitting in my favourite seat in court, down in the firing line, and there was Jim Boy, undersized for a prisoner, just peeping over the edge of the dock, guarded in case he ran amok and started attacking the judge by a huge dock officer. There was the jury, solid and grey, listening impassionately as Guthrie Featherstone spread out his glittering mass of incriminating facts before them. As Featherstone's carefully chosen words passed over our heads like expensive hair oil, and the Rumpole Supporters Club, the Timpsons, sat and pursed their lips and now and then whispered, "Lies, all lies," to each other, I sat watching the judge rather as a noted toreador watches the bull from the barrier during the preliminary stages of the corrida, and remembering what I knew of Mr. Justice Everglade, known to his few friends as Florrie. Everglade's father was Lord Chancellor about the time when Jim's grandfather was doing over the Streatham Co-op. Educated at Winchester and Balliol, he always cracked the Times crossword in the opening of an egg. He was most happy with international trust companies suing each other on nice points of law, and was only there for a fortnight's slumming down the Old Bailey. I wondered exactly what he was going to make of Peanuts Malloy. "Members of the jury, it's right that you should know that it is alleged that Timpson took part in this attack with a number of other youths, none of whom have been arrested," Featherstone purred. "The boy stood on the burning deck whence all but he had fled," I muttered. But the judge was busy congratulating learned counsel for Her Majesty the Queen, who was engaged that morning in prosecuting the pride of the Timpsons. "It's quite right you should tell the jury that, Mr. Featherstone. Perfectly right and proper." "If your lordship pleases." Featherstone was now bowing slightly, and my hackles began to rise. What was this, the old Chums League, fellow members of the Athenaeum? "I'm most grateful to your lordship for that indication." Featherstone did his well-known butler passing the sherry act. I wondered why the old darling didn't crawl up on the bench with Mr. Justice Everglade and black his boots for him. "So I imagine that this young man's defence is, he wasn't justum generis with the other lads." The judge was now holding a private conversation, a mutual admiration society, with my learned friend. I decided to break it up and levered myself to my feet. "I'm sorry, your lordship was asking about the defence." The judge turned an unfriendly eye on me and fumbled for my name. I told you he was a stranger to the Old Bailey, where the name of Rumpole is, I think, tolerably well known. "Yes, Mr. The clerk of the court handed him up a note on which the defender's name was inscribed. "Rumpole." I am reluctant to intrude on your lordship's confidential conversation with my learned friend, but your lordship was asking about the defence.
You are appearing for the young man at Timpson?
I have that honour. At which point the doors of the court swung open, and Albert came in with Nick, a boy in a blazer and a school tie, who passed the boy in the dock with only a glance of curiosity. I always thank God when I consider the remote politeness with which I was treated by the Reverend Wilfred Rumpole, that I get on extremely well with Nick. We understand each other, my boy and I, and have, when he's at home, formed a strong but silent alliance against the almost invincible rule of she who must be obeyed. So I gave a particularly welcoming smile to Nick before I turned my attention back to Florrie. And as Jim Timpson's counsel, I told his lordship, I might know a little more about his case than counsel for the prosecution. To which Mr. Justice Everglade trotted out his favourite bit of Latin.
I imagine, he said loftily, your client says he was not ejusdem generis with the other lads.
Ejusdem generis, oh yes, my lord, he's always saying that. Ejusdem generis is a phrase in constant use in his particular part of Brixton. I had hit a minor jackpot and was rewarded with a tinkle of laughter from the Timpsons and a smile of genuine congratulations from Nick. Mr. Justice Everglade gave us a bare hour for lunch, and Nick and I had it in the canteen. Nick told me about school, and freely confessed, as I'm sure he wouldn't have done to his mother, that he'd been in some sort of trouble that term. There was an old deserted vicarage opposite schoolhouse, my old house and Nick's, and he and his friends had apparently broken in the scullery window and assembled there for poker parties and the consumption of cherry brandy. I was horrified as I drew up the indictment, which seemed to me to contain charges of burglary at common law, housebreaking under the Forcible Entries Act, contravening the Betting, Gaming, Lotteries Act, and serving alcohol on unlicensed premises. Crabtree actually invited a couple of girls from the village. Nick continued his confession, but Bagnall never got to hear of that. Bagnall was Nick's headmaster. I cheered up a little at the last piece of information. Then there's no evidence of girls. As far as your case goes, there's no reason to suppose the girls ever existed. As for the other charges, which are serious— Yes, I suppose they are, rather. I imagine you were walking past the house on Sunday evening, and, attracted by the noise, you went in to investigate.
Dad, Bagnall came in and found us playing poker.
Nick wasn't exactly being helpful. I tried another line. Ah, I know. My lord, my client was only playing poker in order not to look too pious while he lectured his fellow sixth formers on the evils of gambling and cherry brandy.
Oh, Dad, be serious.
Well, I am serious. Don't you want me to defend you?
No, Bagnall's not going to tell the police or anything like that.
I was amazed. He isn't. Well, what's he going to do?
Well, I'll miss next term's exeat.
Do extra work. I thought I should tell you before you got a letter.
Thank you, Nick, thank you.
I'm glad you told me so. There's no question of the police.
Of course not, Nick was laughing. Bagnall doesn't want any trouble.
I watched Nick as he finished his fish and chips, and then turned my thoughts to Jim Timpson, who had also been at school, but with no kindly Bagnall to protect him. Back in court, I was cross-examining that notable grass, Peanuts Malloy, a skinnier, more furtive edition of Jim Timpson. The cross-examination was being greatly enjoyed by the Timpsons and Nick, but not much by Featherstone or Chief Detective Inspector Percival White, who sat at the table in front of me. You don't speak, I put it to Peanuts. The Malloys and the Timpsons are like the Montagues and the Capulets.
What did you say they were?
The judge had, of course, given me my opportunity. I smacked him through the slips for a crafty single. Not ejusdem generis, my lord, I said. Nick joined in the laughter, and even the ranks of Featherstone had to stifle a smile. The usher called silence. We were back to the business in hand. Tell me, Peanuts, How would you describe yourself?" "Is that a proper question?" Featherstone uncoiled himself gracefully. I ignored the interruption. "I mean artistically. Are you a latter-day impressionist? Do all your oils in little dots, do you? Abstract painter? White squares on a white background? Do you indulge in watches melting in the desert like dear old Salvador Dali?"
"I don't know what you're talking about."
Peanuts played a blocking shot, and Featherstone turned a weary smile to the judge. "My lord, neither, I must confess, do I." "Sit quietly, Featherstone," I muttered to him. "All will be revealed to you." I turned my attention back to Peanuts. "Are you a dedicated artist, the Rembrandt of the Remand Centre?"
"I hadn't done no art before."
Peanuts confirmed my suspicions. "So are we to understand that this occasion, when Jim poured out his heart to you, was the first painting lesson you'd ever been to?" Peanuts admitted it. "You'd been at the Remand Centre how long?"
"Couple of months. I was done for a bit of an affray."
"I didn't ask you that, and I'm sure the reason you were on remand was entirely creditable. What I want to know is, what inspired you with this sudden fascination for the arts?"
"Well, the chief screw. He suggested it."
"You were suddenly told to join the painting class, weren't you? And put yourself next to Jim?"
"Something like that, yeah."
"And you were sent there not in the pursuit of art, Peanuts, but in the pursuit of evidence. You knew that, and you supplied your masters with just what they wanted to hear, even though Jim Timpson didn't say a word to you." Everyone in court, including Nick, looked impressed. Detective Inspector White bit hard on a polo mint, and Featherstone oozed to his feet in a rescue bid. "I don't know quite what my learned friend is saying. Is he suggesting that the police—" "Oh, it's an old trick," I said, staring hard at the Chief Inspector. "Bang the suspect up with a notable grass when you're really pushed for evidence. They do it with grown-ups often enough. Now they're trying it with children."
"Mr. Rumpole," the judge sighed, "you are speaking a language which is totally foreign to me."
"Let me try and make myself clear, my lord. I was suggesting that Peanuts was put there as a deliberate trap." By now even the judge had the point.
"You are suggesting that Mr. Malloy is not a genuine amateur painter?"
"No, my lord, merely an amateur witness."
"Yes." I actually got a faint smile. "I see. Please go on, Mr. Rumpole."
Another day or so of this, I felt, and I'd get invited to tea at the Athenaeum. "What did you say first to Jim, as you drew your easel alongside?"
"Don't remember."
"Don't you?"
"I think we were speaking about the stones." "What stones are these?"
The judge's ignorance of the life around him seemed to be causing him some sort of wild panic. "The Rolling Stones, my lord." The information meant nothing to him. "Jazz musicians, as I understand it, my lord, of some notoriety."
"We was talking about the Stones concert at Hammersmith Odeon," Peanuts continued. "We've both been to it, like, and, well, we talked about that, and then Jim said, well, he said as how he and the other blokes had done a butcher's."
Conversation had now taken a nasty turn. I saw that the judge was writing industriously.
"Jim said that he and the other blokes had done a butcher's."
Then he looked up at me.
"Well, Mr. Rumpole, is that a convenient moment to adjourn?"
It was a very convenient moment for the prosecution, as the evidence against us would be the last thing the jury heard before sloping off to their homes and loved ones. It was also a convenient moment for Peanuts. He would have his second wind by the morning. So there was nothing for it but to take Nick for a cup of tea and a pile of crumpets in the ABC. And so home, to she who must be obeyed. So pictured the three of us that evening, finishing dinner and a bottle of claret. Hilda had told Nick that his grandpa had sent his love and expected a letter, and also dropped me the encouraging news that old C.H. Whiston was retiring and quite appreciated that I was the senior man. Nick asked me if I was really going to be head of chambers, seeming to look at me with a new respect, and we drank a glass of claret to the future, whatever it might be.
Then Nick asked me if I really thought Peanuts Malloy was lying. Well, if he's not, he's giving a damn good imitation. You were great with that judge, he said. I think Nick had really enjoyed himself. There was this extraordinary judge who was always talking Latin. Dad was teasing him, he said to his mother. Hilda was imposing her will on the pudding plates. You want to be careful how you tease judges, she warned, if you're to be head of chambers. On which line she departed, leaving Nick and I to our claret and conversation. I began to discuss with Nick the horrifying adventure of the Speckled Band. You're not still reading those Conan Doyle tales, are you? Said Nick. No, well, not lately. But do you remember when I used to read them to you and we pretended to be Holmes and Watson when we went for walks in Hyde Park? I lit a small cigar and looked at the great detective through the smoke. Tell me, Holmes, what do you think was the most remarkable piece of evidence given by the witness Peanuts Malloy? When he said they talked about the Rolling Stones. Holmes, you astonish me. You see, Watson, we were led to believe they were such enemies. I mean, the families were. They'd never spoken. There they were, chatting about a pop concert. Didn't that strike you as strange, my dear Watson? It struck me as bloody rum, if you want to know the truth, Holmes. I was delighted to see Nick taking over the case. They'd both been to the concert. Well, that doesn't mean anything. Not necessarily. I mean, I was at that concert. Oh, were you indeed? Yes. I don't know if all this helps. If they were old mates, you mean. So Jim might really have confided in him. All the same, Peanuts is lying. And you noticed it. You've got the instinct, Nick. You've got a nose for the evidence. Your career at the bar is bound to be brilliant. I raised my glass to Nick. When are you taking Silk? Shortly after this, she entered with the news that Nick had a dentist's appointment the next day, which would prevent his reappearance down the Bailey. All the same, he had given me a great deal of help, and before I went to bed, I telephoned Bernard, the solicitor, tore him away from his fireside, and instructed him to undertake some pretty immediate research. Next morning, Albert told me that he'd had a letter from old C.H. Whiston, Hilda's daddy, mentioning his decision to retire. I think we'll manage pretty well with you, Mr. Rumpole, as head of chambers, Albert told me. There's not much you and I won't be able to sort out, sir, over a glass or two in the Pomeroy's wine bar, and soon we'll be welcoming Master Nick in chambers. Nick, well, yes, I had to admit it. He is showing a certain legal aptitude. It'll be a real family affair, Mr. Rumpole, like father, like son, if you want my opinion. I remembered Albert's words when I saw Fred Timpson waiting for me outside the court. But before I had time to brood on family tradition, Bernard came up with a rolled-up poster for a pop concert. I grabbed it from him and carried it as unobtrusively as possible into court. When Jim told you he'd done up the butchers, he didn't tell you the date that had happened. Peanuts was back facing the bowling, and Featherstone was up to his usual tricks, trying to interrupt. My lord, the date is set out quite clearly in the indictment. The time had come, quite obviously, for a burst of righteous indignation. My lord, I am cross-examining on behalf of a 16-year-old boy on an extremely serious charge. I'd be grateful if my learned friend didn't supply information which all of us in court know, except for the witness. Very well. Do carry on, Mr. Rumpole. I was almost beginning to like Mr. Justice Everglade. No, he never told me when, like. I thought it was sometime in the summer. Peanuts tried to sound cooperative. Sometime in the summer? Are you a fan of the Rolling Stones, Peanuts? Yeah. Remind me, they were, Still vaguely puzzled, the judge was hunting back through his notes. Sleek as a butler with a dish of peas, Featherstone supplied the information. The musicians, my lord. And was Jim a fan? I ploughed on, ignoring the gentleman's gentleman. He was, yeah. You had discussed music before you met in the remand centre? Before that, Nick? Oh, yeah. Peanuts was following me obediently down the garden path. You used to talk about it at school? Yeah, in quite a friendly way. I was conscious of a startled Fred Timpson looking at his son.
and of Jim in the dock looking for the first time ashamed.
We was all right, yeah.
Did you ever go to a concert with Jimbo? Please think carefully.
Oh, we went to 1 or 2 concerts together,
Peanuts conceded.
In the evening, yeah. What would you do, call at his home and collect him? Ha, you're joking. Of course I wouldn't call at his home.
You wouldn't be welcome in each other's houses.
The Montagues and the Capulets, Mr. Rumpole.
The old sweetheart on the bench had finally got the message. I gave him a bow to show my true love and affection. If your lordship pleases, your lordship puts it extremely aptly. I turned back to Peanuts. So what would you do if you were going to a concert?
Well, we'd leave school together like and then hang around the cafes.
Hang around the cafes?
Cafes, Mr. Rumpole?
Mr. Justice Everglade was enjoying himself translating the answer. Yes, of course, the cafes. Until it was time to go up west. If my lord would allow me, up to the west end of London.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't be separated on these evenings you went to concerts together? It was one of those questions after which you hold your breath. There can be so many wrong answers.
No, we hung around together.
Rumpole breathed a little more easily, but he still had the final question, the great gamble, with all Jim Timpson's chips firmly piled on the red. Faites vos jeux, monsieur et madame, of the Old Bailey jury. I spun the wheel. And did that happen when you went to the Rolling Stones at the Hammersmith Odeon? A nasty silence. Then the ball rattled into the hole. Peanut said,
Yeah.
That was this summer, wasn't it? We were into the straight now, cantering home.
In the summer, yeah. You left school together and hung round a caps like them and went up the Odeon.
Together, all the time.
Well, I told you, didn't I?
Peanuts looked bored and then amazed as I unrolled the poster Bernard had brought. Rushed by taxi from Hammersmith with the date clearly printed across the bottom. My lord, my learned friend might be interested to know the date of the only Rolling Stones concert at Hammersmith Odeon this year. I gave Featherstone an unwelcome eyeful of the poster. He might like to compare it with the date so conveniently set out in the indictment. When the subsequent formalities were over, I went down to the cells. This was not a visit of commiseration. In fact, it would be fair to say I was bloody angry with Jimbo. You had an alibi. You had a proper, reasonable, truthful alibi. And joy of joys, it came from the prosecution. Why the hell didn't you tell me? Jim, who seemed to have little notion of the peril he had passed, answered me quite calmly.
Dad wouldn't have liked it.
Dad? What's Dad got to do with it? I was astonished.
He wouldn't have liked it, Mr. Rumpole, not me going out with Peanuts.
So you were quite ready to be found guilty, to be convicted of robbery, just because your dad wouldn't like it going out with Peanuts Malloy?
Well, Dad got a family to alibi me.
Jim clearly felt that the Timpsons had done their best for him.
Anyway, thanks a lot, Mr. Rumpole. Dad said I could rely on you to win the day, like. I better collect my things.
Wait a minute. I didn't win the day. It was luck, the purest fluke.
It won't happen again. Ah, you're joking, Mr. Rumpole.
Jim thought I was being modest.
Dad told me about you. He says you never let the Timpsons down.
I had a sudden vision of my role in life, from young Jim's point of view, and I gave him the voice of outrage which I use frequently in court. I had a message of importance for Jim Timpson. Do you think that's what I'm here for? To help you along in a career like your dad's? Jim was still smiling maddeningly. My God, I shouldn't have asked those questions. I shouldn't have found out the date of the concert. Then you'd really be happy, wouldn't you? You could follow in Dad's footsteps all your life. Sharp spell of Borstal training to teach you the mysteries of housebreaking, and then a steady life in the nick. Oh, you might really do well. You might end up in Parkhurst, maximum security wing, doing a glamorous 20 years and a hero to the screws. At which the door opened and a happy screw entered for the purpose of springing young Jim. Until the inevitable next time. We've got his things at the gate, Mr. Rumpole. Come on, Jim. You can't stay here all night.
I got to go, Jim agreed. I don't know how to face Dad, really. Me being so friendly with Peanuts.
Jim, I tried a last appeal. If you're at all grateful for what I did...
Oh, I am, Mr. Rumpole. I'm quite satisfied.
Generous of him. Then you can perhaps repay me.
What? Aren't you on legal aid?
It's not that. Leave him. Leave your dad. Jim frowned. For a moment he seemed to think it over. And then he said,
Oh, I don't know as how I can.
You don't know?
Well, Mum depends on me, you see. Like when Dad goes away. She depends on me then as head of the family.
So he left me, and went up to temporary freedom and his new responsibilities. My mouth was dry, and I felt about 90 years old. So I took the lift up to that luxurious eatery, the Old Bailey Canteen, for a cup of tea and a penguin biscuit. At a table in the corner I found certain members of my chambers, George Frobisher, Percy Hoskins, and young Tony Macleay, now resting from their labours, their wigs lying among cups of Old Bailey tea, buns, and chalky bicks. I joined them. Wordsworth entered my head, and I gave him an airing. Trailing clouds of glory do we come.
Yes, marvellous win, that, I was telling them. Young Macleay thought I was announcing my triumph. Yes, Rumpole, I hear you've had a splendid win. Old George, ever generous, smiled, genuinely pleased.
It'll be years before you get the check, Hoskins grumbled.
Albert tells me he's had a letter from Whiston, George said. I just wanted to say, I'm sure we'd all like to say, you'll make a splendid head of chambers, Rumpole.
At which point Percy Hoskins produced a newspaper which turned out to contain an item of news for us all.
Have you seen the Times, Rumpole?
No, I haven't had time for the crossword.
Guthrie Featherstone. He's taken silk.
It was the apotheosis, the great day for the Labour Conservative member for wherever it was, one-time unsuccessful prosecutor of Jim Timpson, and now one of Her Majesty's Council, called within the bar. He went down to the House of Lords, tailored out in his new silk gown and lace jabot, knee breeches with diamante buckles, patent shoes, black silk stockings, lace cuffs, and full-bottomed wig. He took with him Marigold, his lady wife, who was young enough, and I suppose pretty enough, for Henry, our junior clerk, to eye wistfully. The couple were escorted by Albert, who'd raided Mossbroth for a top hat and morning coat for the occasion, and when the Lord Chancellor had welcomed Guthrie to that special club of Queen's Counsel, on whose advice the Queen, luckily for her, never has to rely for a moment, they came back to chambers, where champagne was served by Henry and old Miss Petterson, our typist, in Whiston's big room looking out over Temple Gardens. After the fourth glass, I felt able to relax a bit. I wandered off to where Uncle Tom was giving Marigold a brief history of life in our chambers over the last half-century. Percy Hoskins was in attendance, and George.
It's some time since we had champagne in chambers.
Uncle Tom accepted a refill from Albert. It's some time since we had a silk in chambers. Hoskins smiled at Marigold, who flashed a row of well-groomed teeth back at him.
Your husband's star's risen so quickly, Mrs. Featherstone. Only 10 years' call, and he's an MP and leading counsel.
Hoskins was clearly so excited by the whole business, he had stopped worrying about his cheques for half an hour.
Oh, it's the PR, you know. Guthrie's frightfully good at the PR. Guthrie always says the most important thing at the bar is to be polite to your instructing solicitor. Don't you find that, Mr. Rumpole?
Polite to solicitors? It's never occurred to me.
Guthrie so admires you, Mr. Rumpole. He admires your style of advocacy.
I had just sunk another glass of the beaded bubbles as passed by Albert, and I felt a joyous release from my usual strong sense of tact and discretion.
I suppose it makes a change from bowing 3 times and offering to black the judge's boots for him.
Marigold's smile didn't waver.
He says you're most amusing out of court, too. Don't you quote poetry?
Only in moments of great sadness, madam, or extreme elation.
Guthrie's so looking forward to leading you in his next big chase."
This was an eventuality which I should have taken into account as soon as I saw Guthrie in silk stockings. As a matter of fact, it had never occurred to me. "Leading me? Did you say leading me?"
"Well, he has to have a junior now, doesn't he? Naturally, he'll want the best junior available."
"Now he's a leader?"
"And now he's left the junior bar."
At which point the QC himself bore down on us in a rustle of silk and drew me into a corner. "I just want to say I don't see why recent events should make the slightest difference to the situation in Chambers. You are the senior man in practice, Rumpole." Henry was passing with the fizzing bottle. I held out my glass, and the tide ran foaming in it. "You wrong me, Brutus," I told Featherstone. "You said an older soldier, not a better."
Quotation. Touché, very apt."
"Is it?"
"I mean, all this will make absolutely no difference. I'll still support you, Rumpole, as the right candidate for head of Chambers."
I didn't know about being a candidate, having thought of the matter as settled, and not being much of a political animal. But before I had time to reflect on whatever the honourable member was up to, the door opened, letting in a formidable draught, and the head of Chambers, C.H. Whiston, she's daddy, wearing a tweed suit, extremely pale, supported by Albert on one side and a stick on the other. He made the sort of formidable entrance that the ghost of Banquo stages at dinner with the Macbeths. He was duly installed in an armchair, from which he gave us all a wintry smile.
"Albert wrote to me about this little celebration. I was determined to be with you, and the doctor has given permission for no more than one glass of champagne."
Whiston held out a transparent hand into which Albert inserted a glass of non-vintage. Whiston lifted this with some apparent effort and gave us a toast.
"To the great change in Chambers. Now we have a silk. Guthrie Featherstone, QC MP."
I had a large refill to that. Whiston absorbed a few bubbles, wiped his mouth on a clean folded handkerchief, and proceeded to the oration.
"You, Featherstone, have brought a great distinction to Chambers. You know, when I was a young man, you remember when we were young men, Uncle Tom, we used to hang around in Chambers for weeks on end. I well recall we used to pray for work, any kind of work. But as you grow older at the bar, you discover it's not having any work that matters. It's the quality that counts."
Yeah, I'm always saying we ought to do more civil. This was the dutiful Erskine Brown inserting his oar.
"Now, Guthrie Featherstone, QCMP, will, of course, command briefs in all divisions, planning, contract." Whiston's voice sank to a note of awe. "Even chancery. I was so afraid after I've gone that this Chambers might become known as merely a criminal set. And, of course, there's no doubt about it. Too much criminal work does rather lower the standing of a Chambers."
"Couldn't you install pithead baths?" I hadn't actually meant to say it aloud, but it came out very loud indeed.
Horace."
Whiston turned his pale eyes on me for the first time.
"So we can have a good scrub down after we get back from the Old Bailey. Now, Horace Rumpole, and I mean no disrespect whatever to my son-in-law, Horace does practice almost exclusively in the criminal courts."
"One doesn't get the really fascinating points of law, not in criminal work." Erskine Brown was adding unwanted support to the motion. "I've often thought we should try and attract some really lucrative tax cases into Chambers." That, I'm afraid, did it. Just as if I were in court, I moved slightly to the centre and began my speech. "Tax cases?" I saw them all smiling encouragement at me. "Marvellous! Tax cases make the world go round. Compared to the wonderful world of tax, crime is totally trivial. What does it matter if some boy loses a couple of years of his life? Totally unimportant. Anyway, he'll grow up to be banged up for a good 5, shut up with his own chamber pot in some convenient hole we all prefer not to think about. Whiston tried to reach a settlement. Now then, Horace, your practice no doubt requires a good deal of skill. Skill? Who said skill? I glared round at the learned friends. Any fool could do it. It's only a matter of life and death, that's all it is. Crime's a sort of game. How can you compare it to the real world of offshore securities and deductible expenses? All you young men in chambers can learn an enormous amount from Horace Rumpole when it comes to crime. Whiston now seemed to be the only one who was still smiling. I turned on him. You make me sound just like Fred Timpson. Ah, yes, well, Timpsons and their like are no doubt grist to Rumpole's mill. Whiston was starting on the summing up. But it's the balance that counts. Now, you'll be looking for a new head of chambers. Are we still looking? My friend George Frobisher had the decency to ask, and Whiston told him, I'd like you all to think it over carefully and put your views to me in writing. We should all try and remember it's the good of the chambers that matters, not the feelings, however deep they may be, of any particular person. He then called on Albert's assistants to raise him to his feet, lifted his glass with an effort of pure will, and offered us a toast to the good of chambers. I joined in and drank deep, it having been a good 30 seconds since I had had a glass to my lips. As the bubbles exploded against my tongue, I noticed that the Featherstones were holding hands, and the brand new artificial silk was looking particularly delightful. Some weeks later, when I gave Hilda the news, she was deeply shocked. Guthrie Featherstone, head of chambers. We were at breakfast. In fact, Nick was due back at school that day. He was neglecting his cornflakes and reading a book. By general acclaim... I'm sorry. Hilda looked at me as if she'd just discovered that I'd contracted an incurable disease. Oh, he can have the headaches working out Albert's extraordinary bookkeeping system. I thought for a moment. Yes, I'd like to have been head of chambers. And then put the thought from me. If only you could have become a QC. She was now pouring me an unsolicited cup of coffee. I reminded Nick that I'd promised to see him off at Liverpool Street, finished my cooling coffee, stood up and took a glance at the book that was absorbing him, expecting it to be perhaps that spine-chilling adventure relating to the footprints of an enormous hound. To my amazement, the shocker in question was entitled simply, Studies in Sociology. It's interesting. Nick sounded apologetic. You astonish me. Oh, Bagnall was talking about what I should read if I get into Oxford. Well, of course you're going to read law, Nick. We're going to keep it in the family. Hilda, the barrister's daughter, was clearing away deafeningly. Well, I thought perhaps PPE and then go on to sociology. Nick sounded curiously confident. Before Hilda could get in another word, I made my position clear. PPE. That's very good, Nick. That's very good indeed. For God's sake, let's stop keeping things in the family. Later, as we walked across the barren stretches of Liverpool Street Station, I tried to explain what I'd meant. That's what's wrong, Nick. That's the devil of it. They're being born round us all the time. Little Mr. Justice Everglades, little Timpsons, little Guthrie Featherstones, all being set off to follow in Father's footsteps. We were at the barrier, shaking hands awkwardly. Let's have no more of that. No more following in Father's footsteps. Nick smiled, although I have no idea if he understood what I was trying to say. I'm not totally sure that I understood it either. Then the train removed him from me. I waved for a little, but he didn't wave back. That sort of thing. It's embarrassing for